Y'all sing it with me. Well, he never promised that the cross would not get heavy and the hill would not be hard to climb. And he never promised a victory without fighting, but he said help would always come in time. Just remember when you're standing in the valley of decision and the adversary says give in, just hold on. Our Lord will show up. He will take you through the fire again. Just hold on. Our Lord's gonna show up, and he will take you through the fire again.
Y'all know where I stand of all the years I've been here. You know where I stand. There's no doubt in your mind where I stand. But I also stand for the fact that we need to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. That sometimes we let religion get in the way of people getting saved. Over in Cuba, and let me just tell you this, but this is part of the message. It's, I think in a book they call that the prologue, don't they? Or some part of that. I ain't read very many books. But to start with, sometimes they let religion get in the way of getting a person saved. What they want to tell you is how to act before God has a chance to clean you up. Well, doesn't that go on right here in America? We tell people how they should act and what they should do before God has a chance to do any cleaning up. He told them, he says, come with me and I'll make you fishers of men. As I've said, and you've heard this before, nothing new. He called you to fish, not clean. Just fish. Don't worry about the rest of it. Don't worry about the scales. Don't worry about the fins. Don't worry about, let's just say it, it's a cowboy church. Don't worry about the guts, the blood and the guts. Just worry about the fishing, okay? And when we do the fishing and God does the cleaning, here's what happens. You made a Christian. You haven't run one off. Now, when we go to discipleship, people, in discipleship, we must teach them how they are to look at the Bible, how they're to look at fellow Christians, how they're to act and do all that. That's part of the training process. But when we start, we need to just fish. We just need to fish. And quit worrying about everything else. You know, and people want to tell you how to act, you should act. Well, there's some truth to that. If you're on the front row, you shouldn't be a poppin' Johnny, up and down all the time, running all around. If you're going to do that, you need to sit in the back. There are certain things that you ought to learn to act right. But when we're here, we need to let God work in people. We don't need to work on them. What could I say that would cause you to do anything different than you're doing? Probably nothing, is there? But what if God's Holy Spirit started convicting you of something? Would that not be better? Isn't it better to let God handle it? I guarantee you, here's what's going to happen. If they're going to listen to us, we're going to mess something up. You know, instead of going in drive, we'll have them in reverse. And it'll happen every time, won't we? Religion. Now, I don't have any problem. I love tradition. I love some of them old traditional preachers. I was trained by one. One of them Cuban pastors over there, he didn't know how to take me because I didn't smile much. Well, I wasn't there to laugh and joke. I was there to work. And he didn't know how to take me, did he, Terry? But the guy that I was trained by, he didn't laugh much. He said, this is serious business. But I love the tradition. I love the tradition of the church. I love some of them old preachers that you can go back and come out of archives and listen to them preach. I love that stuff. I love to hear Dr. Criswell preach. I love to hear, as I played for you one day back in our deal, we got to listen to R.G. Lee preach. But all of them men, with all of their tradition, they still preached Jesus, didn't they? Look at what the Apostle Paul was going through. In the 23rd chapter of the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul had been taken out of the area and he had been arrested and put in chains. And we know that then he kind of whispered something to one of the guards there and asked him, just kind of hinting around, kind of like you giving somebody a little hint. He said, do you think it's right for a Roman to be bound this way? Something to that effect. Well, then all of a sudden, it was like the world was coming to an end. Because see, what they had just done to the Apostle Paul, by law, by Roman law, they could not do. And so all of a sudden, things begin to change. But they knew that there was something wrong, because why was so many people against the Apostle Paul? Why? Why was it that all of these religious people were against the Apostle Paul? And so this commander knew that there was something wrong, and he was going to find out. So what he did was he kept the Apostle Paul there with him, and he sent a message to the chief priest and says, you get everybody there, because we're going to get this settled one way or the other. And so they gathered there, and then he brought the Apostle Paul in, and he let the Apostle Paul speak. And look what Apostle Paul said. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, men and brethren, I have lived in a good conscience before God unto this day. The Apostle Paul looked at those men and all of those religious men, and he made a comment that he had lived in good conscience before the Lord until that time. Now, as you're reading that, you'll say, well, I don't really understand what he was saying. Here's what he's saying. You ready? He's saying, when I was a Jewish man and I was following the Jewish law, I was zealous. I did exactly what the law said to do. I worshiped God exactly how the law said to do it. And he said, now that I have become a Christian, when my eyes were open to Christianity, on the Damascus Road, when I had an intervention with Jesus, since I am a Christian, I am doing it to the best of my ability with all zeal and all excellence that I have. So what he was saying is simply this. Before my eyes was open to grace and mercy, I did it exactly like the law said. Even to the point of holding the coats or watching the clothes of those who would stone people who were not of the faith. But now that I learned the new way, because of what happened on the Damascus Road, I now have done this with the same amount of zeal that I had done previously. So he's saying that because I have learned something new, I have changed, And I'm doing it the way that Christ wants it done because of my meeting with him on the Damascus Road. And he said, then the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Look how Paul answered that. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. For you sit and judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? So here's what's going on. This is the time that time and time again when a high priest is sitting there and he doesn't like what someone says, he has ordered them to be struck totally contrary to the law. Now I got news for you. There are still denominations today that follow the law. The Jewish people, they follow the law. There are denominations out there that follow a rules and regimen that is unbelievable. But when they do that, they don't need to be going contrary to the law. When you when you do it, what you should do is you should do it to the best of your ability. If that's your game in town, then that's what you need to do. But if you're like the rest of us, who believes in what Jesus Christ did on Calvary, then you need to do that to the best of your ability. You mean to go for grace and mercy, understanding that that law is not going to help you. The law will not help you. But grace and mercy will set you free. The law was designed for one purpose and one purpose only. The law was designed so what would happen is it would show your inadequate and your inability to be saved. It would show that you have no hope of heaven without the direct intervention of Jesus Christ. Because of that, then what you understood is because of what Christ did on Calvary, you now have an opportunity to go to heaven. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Because of what he did on Calvary, not because of the law. There has only been one person to fulfill the law, and that's the person of Jesus Christ. And if Jesus is the only one that can fulfill the law, good luck on you trying to fulfill it. It won't work. See, the law is in such detail. When God wrote the law, when he brought the law to us, he wrote it in such detail that you and I, it does not just include the initial act, it includes the thoughts in our head. And when we're including the thoughts in our head, then how are we going to fulfill the law if every one of us has said it? We have said something off the cuff, and after we get to thinking about it, realize that wasn't right. Folks, the moment that we said it, we broke the law. But in grace, we can look at forgiveness. We can tell we can tell God through what Jesus has done for us. We can say, Father, I am sorry. I made that comment. That's not what I meant to say. And then the Apostle Paul looked at this chief priest who, by the way, in this particular time in history, if you'll read Josephus, you'll see that a lot of times those high priests are there because they bought the position. Or they were put there by the Romans because the Romans could control them. They were not out of the lineage of the high priest. And so, as he said to him, he looked at him and says, you whitewashed wall. Most of you are a little bit too young to understand whitewashing. Some of you are not. Some of you understand it. Most of you, let me tell you what whitewashing is. It's watered down paint because you ain't got much money to start with. Really, that's what it is. But here's what you do. How many of you remember when Dad would tell you, okay, your chore for today is to go paint that fence. Now, he directly did not tell you, if you see a rotten board in there, take it off and replace it. You painted right over it, didn't you? I did. I was ready to go. I was just going to slap some paint on it and go. But I painted over the rotten spot. Well, what good did that do me? Here's what the Apostle Paul was saying to him. Look at that scripture and listen to this. You whitewashed wall. Well, here's what he's saying. You vile, despicable human being. You are so rotten on the inside, it's pathetic. All you are is given the appearance of good. Now, you can say, well, preacher, how'd you get all of that out of there? That's what it means. That's what it means. It means that you're whitewashed. In other words, you're looking good, but it's all covered up. You ain't done nothing. You ain't done anything. It's all been whitewashed. It's all been taken care of. It's all been covered up. So everybody looking will think you something special. But guess what? You ain't. And the Apostle Paul continued to hammer on that. First of all, the Apostle Paul didn't know who he was. He wasn't sitting in his time that he would go to synagogue. He was not there in his traditional high priest garment. He was not there in a capacity. Paul didn't know who he was. But Paul then, as they said, and those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? The Apostle Paul, understanding then who he was, stated that you should not speak evil of the rulers of your people, and he pretty much apologized. But then he understood something. Because he had already started this. The way that Apostle Paul was going to do this is that he already knew that God was going to protect him. So he divided the crowd. And so when he divided the crowd, he had to do it with what? Resurrection. Resurrection. Half of those Sadducees or Pharisees, one of them believed in resurrection, the other did not. In verse 6, but when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. So what he did was he divided the crowd. All of a sudden, the Apostle Paul got half of the people. Everybody was against him. Nobody was for him. But the moment that he said that he was a Pharisee, half of the crowd says, oh, we like him now. We like him now. And they began to argue with the Sadducees. And so it was over now, not over the Apostle Paul. It was over whether you believed in resurrection and spirits and angels. The Apostle Paul, of course, believed in those things. He was not telling anything that was not true, but he was stating that that's his point of contention with them. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees said that there is no resurrection and no angels or no spirits, but the Pharisees confessed both. So the Apostle Paul had them going. This Roman ruler came in and said, we'll get this settled because I'm going to have you to set before all of them. And the Apostle Paul has turned the trick on them. Now there's even a bigger argument. It's not only about the Apostle Paul. Now we're arguing doctrine. Are we going to argue the doctrine of angels and the doctrine of the second coming, or the resurrection from the dead? Jesus has already proved there is a resurrection from the dead, as He has already set the example for us. Which is it? The Sadducees didn't believe in. The Pharisees did. The Apostle Paul had them where he wanted them. Look what else it says. And there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes and Pharisees partly arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So that what happened was, of all of the things that was being said, the high priest wanted him slapped, and he wanted things to happen to him. Now half of the people there is on Paul's side. But in the same token, half is against him. And then you look at this, and it says, "Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded his soldiers to go down and take him by force and bring from among them and bring him into the barracks." That by force does not mean that they put him in chains. What it means is simply this. They went and forced their way through the crowd. They got the Apostle Paul out the same way that one of our police officers do when they are going into a place and retrieving somebody. When they had to go into those schools down in Florida, how they brought those young people out with their hands over their head. It looked like they were really there was something wrong, but all they were doing is letting the people on the outside know that these kids are okay to let them out. Let's get them out of here and away from the destruction. That's the same way that they did it here. And they took the Apostle Paul. But in closing, I want to read this to you. The Lord's grace to Paul, and listen to how the Lord did this. "But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, 'Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome.'" So here's what happened. The Lord showed up. How many of you would, all of a sudden, if the Lord was standing by your bed, what would happen? First of all, I'd have to find somebody with some of that nitro pills. Y'all can laugh if you want to. Y'all be looking for the same pills. You talk about when Fred Sanford was saying it's the big one. Let me tell you something more. Y'all be thinking it's the big one. But what if the Lord stood by your bed and say, "Be of good cheer," and He comforts you, and He lets you know it was Him? Then all of a sudden He said, "I'm going to send you somewhere else. I'm going to send you somewhere else. I'm going to send you to Rome, to a total pagan society. I'm going to send you there to testify of me." What an honor. What an honor that Paul had. Can you imagine? Of all of the things that were going on, he said, "Paul, you've brought my message here, but now you've got to go take it to Rome. You got to take it to Rome. And you got to take it. You got to take it, why? For me. Do this for me." What an honor. What an honor.